Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Drumcore Coffee Shop Podcast. I am Rob, and I'm here with George. What's up, George?
What's going on?
Dude, it's been like a hot second since we've done this.
But not a hot second since we've seen each other.
No. It's like about a week or so.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, last episode, it was like right after the DCI season. And now we're back right after the WGI season, Winter Drumline season. So, dude, what an interesting season for us.
Absolutely. And I will say I'm not a performer, long since being a performer. I am totally feeling the withdrawals.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's not like we didn't go to every single Southern California show that there was, and then go to all the way to the Midwest to WGI.
And had a fantastic week in Dayton, which we will get into during this episode.
I'll just put it this way: it was nonstop from the time we got there to the time we left. But
yep.
All right, and without further ado, let's meet our special guest that we have today.
Absolutely.
So joining us today, we have the two founders and two people that are the Aged Out Podcast guys. So we have Evan. What's up, Evan?
What's up, guys? Although, if you can see my name tag on here, it probably has my wife's name from her school Zoom, but that's all right.
It's all right. And then we're also joined by his counterpart, Mike Fantini. What's up, Mike?
Hey, how's it going, guys? Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Did I pronounce your last name right? I don't want to butcher
Say it again.
Fantini?
Yep,
Yeah.
that's it.
All right, cool.
Perfect.
That's
Cool.
it.
Hey, so welcome to us here in Southern California. Just briefly, where are you guys from? Where are you guys located at?
I'll start off. I am in Richmond, Kentucky, which thankfully, since you guys were here last time, kind of maintained the weather, the beautiful weather, which we'll talk about. But yeah.
And then I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, about an hour and a half up the highway, almost in southern Indiana, right on the river.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so like I said, we're here in Southern California. Now, where we're recording the podcast is in a city called Rancho Cucamonga. Now, if you're not familiar with Southern California, we're about 45 miles east of the city of Los Angeles. But just to the southwest of me, there's a city called Chino. And then a little west of that is a city called Chino Hills. So
Who knew?
Yeah.
He went
There's
at the
a
very
difference
beginning.
there. I know from listening to your guys' podcast, you kind of tend to lump them both up together, but there is a difference, and they're separated by a freeway, the 71 freeway.
Yeah.
We didn't. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike. No, you go
No,
ahead.
we didn't learn about that until this now a week and a half ago. Whenever finals was, I had no idea it was two different places. Chino Hills. Thought it was the same thing, just shortened.
I'm not going to lie. I did know that there were two different high schools, but in my head when we were recording that podcast, which Ian so very elegantly corrected us on, and rightfully so, I just shortened Chino Hills to Chino, probably the same way I do when I'm talking about like X and Rhythm X, or shorten something like that. So no slight to any groups out there. They're all fantastic.
Yeah,
but,
and I think the big difference between those two cities, like Chino and Chino Hills, like in Chino Hills, I want to say the Water District, they gather up old drumsticks from like DCI finals. They grind them down and they mix it in the water there, and then they give it to the kids that are in the drum lines to help them magically drum better.
Always wondered. Wondered. They had
It's
to
in
have
the
something in the water.
water.
Absolutely in the water.
It's in the water.
Had to have something in the water to make them play so well.
Because you have Chino Hills and then you have Ayala High School, which are
That's the other thing is like Chino Hills and Ayala High School are super close to each other, which is crazy considering the strength of both programs.
Isn't Arcadia only like a 40-minute drive from there too?
Well,
not even that.
Everything is when you're talking about Southern California, it's like everything's like
30 minutes,
45 minutes to an hour away from
crazy.
each other.
And then Vista Marietta, who didn't even make the trek to WGI, they're about 40 minutes south. Yeah.
That's Mike's high school, isn't it? Doesn't he work there?
Yeah.
They're nasty too.
Yeah, and it's funny, like on YouTube, I posted a video and you see, oh, look, they're trying to be like Broken City High School. And it's like, it only makes sense.
It's the same people.
Yeah.
It's the same staff. I mean,
So
Yeah.
So a little bit. Oh, go ahead.
We'll talk about that later. No, I was going to say, we'll talk. I think we'll talk about Mike Jackson later and probably get into some of that, but
Yeah.
it's all right.
I've been, and that's funny. I've watched his lines all these years, but I never really kind of met him till this year. And I'm like, dude, I've been a big fan since 9090, Yeah.
Heck yeah.
But
My high school actually was really competitive with Mission Viejo back when we were in school, like because we were roughly around the same age. So we go back all the way to then, like meeting up,
Heck yeah.
like fall band competitions and things like that.
and then like,
So did you go to Rancho Cucamonga?
No, I went to a small high school called Chaffey High School in Ontario, which probably not a lot of people have heard of. But yeah, the drumline scene back then is not what it was now. That's for sure.
But the seeds of what it is now, were definitely being established back. I mean, like literally,
yeah,
during that era, you know, you had like basically that first generation of kids marching drum corps being taught, and that has just grown and grown and grown, and now it's just this whole thing here in Southern
I'll
California.
put it to you this way: imagine being like in a high school snare line, and you go to a competition, and there's Mission Viejo High School back then, and you look, and they just have 2 snare drummers, and it's Roger Carter and Jeff Queen, and then they start playing, and then you just feel that totally defeated, like because they're like
Well, we're not
15-year-old
beating them.
yeah, and they were doing like split rolls and everything else. Like 91 Mission Viejo High School is still like the ridiculous standard for me as far as high school drumming goes, snare wise.
Yeah.
That's like in the snare world. I remember during COVID and stuff, we did kind of a reach back because fortunately, like people like you and Drumline Archives and stuff were just dropping bombs of stuff that's like back in the day, and they were dropping like these 95 Blue Nights videos where it's just like a 6-man snare line and they're just stacked to the teeth, and people are like, I've never even heard of this group.
Yeah, like Jeff Queen and Nick Angelis.
Yeah,
were in that line.
Yeah.
And they didn't make finals.
No, they didn't make finals, but
You know,
they drummed their butts off for sure.
Yeah.
so
sure.
I wanted to ask you guys. I mean, and I went back and I actually went and listened to the very first Aged Out podcast episode where you guys got.
I'm
into this.
terribly sorry you had to subject yourself to that.
All I know is the audio
Evan-
was super low, and my navigation was super high. So it was like you would be interrupted every once in a while by Siri, like telling me to go somewhere. But for the people that don't know in our audience, I'm sure a lot of people do. What was the era that you guys came up in, and like what made you fall in love with, wanting to do this activity beyond like just the stuff you guys were doing like in high school?
I'll start, I guess, because I
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
was a couple years ahead of Mike. But so grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, started taking lessons when I was in middle school. I'll keep this fairly short and concise, but from a guy named Greg Strauss, who marched quads, or I guess they weren't quads then, tri-toms in the 80s Bridgman line. And so he never talked about drum corps at that point, but just got me super jazzed about like percussion and stuff. I was always kind of drawn to classic rock that my dad would listen to in the car on the way to school with me.
Hold on real quick. What's classic rock to you? Like, like is it like
AC/DC, Aerosmith, Motley Crue?
All right, because if you would have
Guns N'
said
Roses.
if you would have said like Green Day or something, I would have been like totally like, because that's not classic rock to me. That's like
No, my dad was born in 59 and
All right, cool.
graduated high school in the 70s. So
like classic rock like Pearl Jam and Bon Jovi. Yeah, it's like, oh man, yeah.
no,
that's cool.
So that kind of got me into it, AC/DC, that sort of stuff. And then just kind of got the itch to drum and playing drum set. And then when I got to high school, both of my instructors in high school talked just a lot about their experience at Morehead State, which is a small university in Eastern Kentucky that used to be very competitive in PASIC in the early
right. That's where I
90s
know
and
that.
stuff
That's where I know
with UNT and
yeah.
those guys. They won PASIC, I believe it was in 96.
Was Jim Campbell the instructor there?
No, Jim Campbell was at the University of Kentucky. He was a guy named Frank Otis. But a lot of those dudes that were in that line, like Eric Ward was an old 90s cadets guy. He marched 93 to, I don't know, 95, 96, somewhere in that.
Some good lines, yeah.
And then he actually taught cadets from like 2001 to like 2004 or 5, somewhere in
good
there.
lines.
More good lines. And so that was kind of like my tutelage. I was just all about Eric Ward. I think Jeff Queen was kind of more higher notoriety when I was in high school. Like he had that book that came out, like Jeff Queen. There was his solos all over the early stages of YouTube. But we were just all about Eric Ward. We basically called him Yoda, and we referred to Jeff Queen as Darth Vader because he was just less known. And yeah, those dudes just always talked about like, in the Moorhead at the 90s, we'd like just drum all the time, and we'd go and we'd drum and we'd drum, and then we'd go to PASIC and then we'd drum. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I just want to go drum. And I probably saw my first drum corps show somewhere around there, 2003, 2004. The first VHS I ever got was Cavaliers 2003, the Niagara show. And then, when I saw my first drum corps in person, I was just hooked. We went to Indianapolis in 2005 when they had the Indianapolis regional. Finals weren't there, but they had a regional in Indianapolis. And I just saw it and I was just like, holy shit, I want to do this. And so then that was my goal on and on. Did high school, was very fortunate to have some pretty good private instruction from those guys. And then marched a few years of independent open at a group called Tate's Creek, which is now called Triple Crown.
Sure.
And did that for 3 years. Tried out for several drum corps and got cut several places, but ultimately found a home at Carolina Crown in 2009. The Grass is Always Greener show. Marched there in 2009, marched there in 2010. And in between that, I marched 3 years at Rhythm X, 2010, 11, and 12.
That was
snare line,
that was
snare line, and all this.
Lee Bettis at Crown.
Lee was there both years. Lee and Andrew Markworth were doing the percussion arranging and kind of holding it down. Zach Schlicker was teaching the battery a lot. Eric Kraft, those guys. Yeah, it was obviously a really good time to be at Crown. They were kind of on the up and up from that 07 Triple Crown show to like Finney in 08. Grass is Always Greener. Ended up being the center by accident in 2010 due to injuries from some people.
It happens.
Yeah, it was super stressful. Then did my 3 years at Rhythm X, and so that's kind of a quick thrust through it.
Mike, how about you, man?
Yeah, so mine's kind of similar to Evan's. We have a very similar drumming like family tree, if you want to call it that. But going way back to how I first got into drumming, and I'll try and keep this portion pretty quick. Went to a private grade school like K through 8 here in Louisville, Catholic school, no music program. Started taking drum set lessons randomly at the end of my 8th grade year. Had no interest in drumline and stuff, and I was switching to public school system for high school, and none of my friends were really going there. They were all going to Catholic high schools here in town and all that stuff. And so my dad was just asking around people, trying to think of things to help me get involved with, to meet people. And some guy he met through business or knew just said, I went to a high school called Ballard High School here in town. And he was like, I heard Ballard's drumline's pretty good. Isn't your son taking drum lessons? Maybe that would be kind of something fun he would enjoy. And my dad just came home to dinner that night and threw it out there. And it's weird how some knee-jerk decisions can kind of just like direct your entire life.
Yep.
So I didn't think about it. I didn't debate it. I kind of just said, all right, yeah, sure. Why not? And it was that simple of a decision. And then I went to the first audition. They had like a couple days in the spring at the end of the previous school year, and was hooked from the very first time. Jumped into that, went through high school, and it just so happens that my high school instructor for a few of the years was a guy that was at Moorhead with the guys that taught Evan. So we kind of got the same exposure to the Eric Ward and like those 90s cadets, because my instructor's name was Damon Smith. He marched in 93, and then he marched Dutch Boy for a year or two before that out of Canada. But he was a guy, so 93 is just a quick little aside for those that don't know. Damon was in the snare line and then blew his ear out with like 3 weeks left in the season. And I guess that they didn't wear ear protection as religiously back then as they do. A lot of people do now and everything.
What's ear protection, man? We didn't have that.
Exactly. So he literally, his ear was like constantly ringing, couldn't hear worth a crap out of it. Took him to the doctor, and they were like, look, if you don't stop doing this, you will permanently lose hearing in your ear the rest of your life. And so he didn't finish the season. He was there the rest of the tour, helping out and hanging out and stuff. But unfortunate for him, but he still had a great time, obviously, and instilled that love of cadets in all of us that I went to high school with. 05, 06. He was on tour a little bit with the cadets with Eric Ward in the early 2000s years, showed us a ton of videos, learned random licks from those groups, and was hooked. First drum corps show I think I saw was 2006 was the first live one. And I was enamored. Like he took me and a friend of mine to watch the cadets warm up the drum line in the lot. And it was the Louisville show, which is early season. And I laugh about it now because like high school kids were so just like, oh my God, they're perfect and robots. I think having marched now, you look back and there's a video from that lot that I was in. I was like, they all look like they don't want to be there and they're tired and they hate life right now.
Yeah.
And as a naive high school kid, you just don't pick up on that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But you know what's interesting about that, and I love that you went there, is I feel like so many people have this similar experience of when you first get exposed to the activity and you have that honeymoon of basically like you're in love with it, but then it doesn't necessarily reflect a practical reality, right? It's much more like, oh man, they're superheroes. Like, how are they doing that? And it has this kind of magical feeling to it, right?
Yep. Yep.
And then there's a point where you lose that, where you sort of cross the threshold into actually like operating on that level, and your perspective totally changes. You know, what were, you know, if you guys can even remember back then, did you guys have any sort of awareness of crossing that threshold from like, oh wait, I can actually do the thing that I am in love with?
Yeah, I'll let you go, Mike, because I already go for it.
There was never really a doubt in my mind. I've always been a very determined person, and so I kind of have an obsessive personality, and there was never really a doubt that I was going to do it. But I will say there was an awakening moment or a light bulb moment that I had, I guess, just to finish. I ended up marching Blue Stars and their snare line in 2010, and then I marched Blue Coats in 2012, and then did Rhythm X in 11 and 12 with Evan, and then went to school at Moorhead with all him. But my light bulb moment was the first corps camp I went to was my senior year of high school, Blue Coats 09. And if anyone knows about that snare line, there's a lot of talent in it. There's a lot of Rhythm X vets, a lot of multi-year Blue Coat snare drum vets. But I was, 17-year-old, this pie in the sky, like, I'm just going to go to Blue Coats this year and then go march for Tom Monks the year after that at cadets and whatever. Totally clueless. And so that first drum corps camp was really the wake up moment where it's like, oh, I suck. Like this is the real drum corps. Like, this is the start of the process of figuring out who's good enough, who's not, who's too young, that kind of thing, who's got the experience and the hands and the brain for all this stuff, and who meshes with who, and waking up early, tired, going to bed way too late at the camps, and you're trying to get better. And it's like, you just want to go to sleep pretty much. And so that was my big, like, wow, this big fish in a small pond. And then you see the ocean and you're like, well, I got a lot of work to do. And then, so I kind of took that and ran with it and kind of went from there. That was the big exposure to the real world, pretty much, was that 09 November Blue Coats camp.
Yeah. I was going to say, isn't it kind of strange? You go to that first audition and, like, at your school, you're like the best guy. And then you go, and then, like, maybe if you're lucky, you're as good as, like, the guy on the end. And there's like a whole bunch of, like, the end guys, but I don't know. It's just a trip because you see the talent coming from around, and nowadays it's not just the local talent. You get talent coming in from other countries and other parts of the country.
Absolutely.
I got to experience both sides of that coin at one point. I would say when I made Crown and, like, I actually got my offer, my contract, like, I was just super elated, and I didn't really realize, I guess, what I was doing until finals week, because you get contracted, you go into move-ins, and it's just such a learn, get the show down, learn the beats, memorize, clean, and it's a grind for the whole summer. But then finals week in 09, I don't know if they still do, but then we housed at Avon High School the whole time. And Indianapolis is only about a 3.5 hour drive from my hometown. So there's a bunch of people that came and saw me. Like, my instructors came, some people from school came, other just friends from drum lines across town came, and they came and watched us rehearse. And they were just talking to me about, like, how awesome we were. And I was just like, at that point, it kind of set in, because I hadn't really had time to sit down and think, like, how good we are and how well we were doing and scoring and just playing really well. And I was like, man, like, this is it. These are the last 3 shows, and I'm going to cap it off. And then you kind of go back and watch videos at the end of the summer, the Vic Firth videos at the time, and just be like, man, I really did that. But I had a really rough audition my first go out. It was for the summer of 07. I went to Blue Coats. Blue Coats are close to us geographically, and that was the first year they had switched uniforms, and McIntosh was there, and they had a ton of vets and just other people who'd marched come out. And I was cut very fast and humbled very quickly. I did actually audition for Blue Coats for the 2011 summer after my 2 summers at Crown, and didn't end up marching just because of summer internship and needed to graduate college. But I was on the other side of that coin, where I was one of the dudes in the room that had, like, 2 years of drum corps experience. I'd already marched 2 years of Rhythm X and pretty much got a contract offered to me the first Friday night at camp. And there's all these kids that just walk in that know who you are, and they're like, well, I'm not better than that person. Because that's what I was. I walked in, and at my first camp, I was like, well, I know I'm not better than him. I know I'm not better than him. yep, I'm not getting in. I'm not getting in. So it kind of added up quick, but yeah.
But it's good that you went to those early camps. Like I said, it's always good for people to go and at least get that experience, because you never know. And it's sad, and probably, I wanted to march drum corps since I was like 14 or 15, but I was always told myself, oh, I'm not good enough, and I never went to like I was like 18, but I should have went to at least some auditions, because how many people just self-cut themselves by just saying, I'm not good enough, rather than just go in and get that experience.
I got cut from Blue Coats, Cadets, Phantom, Glassman. I mean, I got cut from a lot of places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole handicapping of your chances, right? How many slots are there? How many vets are coming back? Who's showing up? Who's rumored to show up? And then there's always like wild cards and stuff like that. That's something that I encounter a lot with my students, because I give a lot of private lessons specifically with regards to audition prep. And it's interesting. You talked about like how you felt in the room as the like. You had a couple years of drum corps under your belt, a couple of years of high level indoor under your belt, and you were like, oh yeah, and everybody's looking at you like, oh yeah, they're going to make it. And one of the things I talk to my students about is that's the way you need to feel when you walk in. So if you know that, let's have that be the target, and like let's work towards that. Let's work towards you walking in and you thinking, you look around and you go, yeah, I should make it. And everybody else is looking at you like, oh yeah, as soon as you start getting into subs and you start doing down the lines and you start to get a grasp on how people play, like all of that should be there. And I just love it, because we're all talking about these common experiences. It's like, this is the stuff. It's not complicated, and it's not like hugely like there's a lot of differences. Like we're all going through the same stuff, whether it be this decade or whether it be 30 years ago,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, this would make a good like winter drumline show, like coming over the self-doubt. A guy shows up to auditions, and then by the end of the show, he makes the line.
Yeah, heck yeah. I would tell a kid the same thing today. Like, go find like the center snare or somebody is a vet that's got their corps jacket on that wore it to camp or whatever. It's got the beads, the pennies, whatever they're wearing. Go drum with that dude. Like, all right, dude, like let's play the exercises. Like, don't go sit and drum by yourself. Mm-hmm. Like, you want to fit in. And if you can't play with him, you can't play with him. But if you can, you can. I mean, your skill set is not going to change a whole lot over the week, but your confidence will change a ton. Right. And a
lot of what the just in terms of insight into like the audition, like what the other side of it from the staff's point of view with regards to auditions, they know that, and they're actually like looking and assessing to see how you do in this particular pressured situation. How do you respond to the reality that you're walking into? And that has a real impact, because I think what a lot of prospective members don't realize is at auditions you're trying to see the future. Towards the end of the season where you want the group to get to. Everything that stands in the way of getting there. What works towards getting there, right? And you're trying to see if these kids have that, right? And so like how can this situation be a microcosm, a little bit of a litmus test for bringing out those qualities in these kids? And meanwhile these kids are like just trying to figure out how to play the packet and how to do the Viz thing you just taught them.
And this will be, I'm going to segue the crap out of this for Mike here. This was kind of like something we talked with Tom Ungst about too, in like his version of like setting a line for the summer. And those staffs are asking those vets like the same thing, like, well, who do you like? Like, who you guys been hanging out with on lunch break? Who's been talking to you? Who you been drumming with? Like, because you're going to spend 82 days going to war with each other. So who do you want to hang out with? Mm-hmm. This kid's really good. This kid's also pretty good, but we like him, and he's got a really cool, and he's coachable, and he learns fast, and he's gotten better over the course of the weekend. So those staffs are asking those vets the same thing. And that was kind of how Mike and I got into starting the Aged Out podcast. Mm-hmm. And Mike came to me, so I'll put it here in a second, but just giving like high school kids or anybody really that opportunity to just kind of pick our brain, or send us messages over stuff we talk about, and like, hey, would you guys talk about this? So yeah, like 4 years ago, Mike approached me, and take it away.
Oh, first off, amazing segue. Well done. It's like yeah.
It's like you're a pro.
Dude, this is like a family,
No,
like a Family Guy segue, you know.
Yeah, right. So I mean, yeah, that was the original idea. I mean, if you look at the YouTube channel, I think we have it on the Instagram, maybe it's stuff on the Facebook of just your window into the top level of the marching arts activity. And so the idea kind of came about, if this is where you were intending for me to go, Evan, I'm assuming. Um, Sometimes you got to spell it out for me. Um, I was at the gym one day. I had been listening. It was 2017, I think, spring, and I think that was the first summer we covered. If you want to call it covered or whatever. But I've been listening to a lot of Joe Rogan's podcasts while I was working during the day and stuff. And I just randomly, I just randomly had the idea. I was like, why is there nothing in the marching world, for percussion at least, that I'm aware of anyone like our age, older, that's been to the mountaintop, if you want to call it that as an analogy, and is talking about it, has the connections to the staff members, the judges, the people that are recently aged out, the guys that aged out 10 years ago. I mean, all different ends of the spectrum. And why are we not putting this out there? And so you hear all the time, like, if you have an idea, just start doing it. So I am in the middle of my workout. I'm lifting weights at the gym, called Evan immediately and said, hey, do you want to just do a podcast? And I kind of just like pitched it to him exactly how I just told you guys. And again, knee-jerk decision. He didn't really think too hard about it. He just went, yeah, I think that actually sounds like a pretty good idea. And so that was like a Thursday. I went to Best Buy the next day, bought a microphone, grabbed my laptop, and went to his house for the weekend. And we came up with the name, and then we just set the microphone and the laptop on his kitchen table. That's why the acoustics are terrible. The sound quality is terrible. We sound nervous. Like, it was literally less than 48 hours after the idea happened to recording the first episode. And Evan gets credit for the name. We were sitting on his couch drinking a beer, and we were just spitballing things. And he just went, the Aged Out Podcast. I was like, that's it. Mm-hmm. That's it. And we stuck with it. And for me, getting into band was knee jerk. And then this was just a random idea that hit me at the gym, because I was like, Evan knows a lot of people from where he marched. I know a lot of people from where I marched. Why don't we do it? Because I talk a lot sometimes. Well, a lot of times, if you'll ask Evan. He's a very conversational person. And so it's like, why not? And we just kind of took it and ran with it. And it was a slow burn at first, but you just keep doing it, and you keep doing it, and you keep doing it, and you get better and better and better. And we haven't made it, if you want to call it that, or however you want to define that, but we're a lot more well-known than we were 3.5 years ago. And I feel like we're a lot better at it, and we've just kind of been running with it and seeing where it goes.
Yeah, George, you mentioned that you listened to that first one, and we have actually done that recently too, and just pretty much cringe.
It's bad.
It was a learning curve for sure.
But it's
learning how to just like talk casually to the microphone, because that's what we wanted to do. Right. Like, we sit on the couch, and we BS to each other, and we talk about shows, and we talk about the activity, and we're like, we want it to feel like that. At first, it 100% did not feel like that at all. It was just very labored and not organic at all. So we have gotten better in that respect, and this thing sitting here doesn't seem to bother me as much as it once did. But yeah, we're very blessed to have learned from a pretty good array of well-known educators and just gotten knowledge from those dudes. And basically, I don't remember who it was that we had on a podcast, but they talked about, maybe it was Pete Sapadin, but he was talking about how like drum knowledge is kind of archaic. It's like passed down from person to person. It's very tribal. And so we just wanted to try to do that on a larger scale than the high schools we teach. And of course, we don't sit on here and break down technique, but like you were saying, George, just like giving information on like maybe how you go to a camp, or maybe how you approach this. Maybe it's helpful to somebody. So,
well, I mean, like they're definitely, and I'm sure you guys have seen this. I mean, you experienced it, and you've also seen it because you guys are educators too, where you meet a student and you get a very quick sense of what their perspective is, right? And you go, and like there's a wall somewhere. There's a wall somewhere that they have not seen the other side of. So it's really
you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly. And what's nice is that you do have this podcast that's now how many episodes in?
76
episodes. Tons of amazing interviews, tons of insight, tons of glimpses on the other side of that wall, for kids. Because it's not just like, let's interview people because they're famous. Let's interview people and talk about their experiences so that kids don't have to assume. They can assume less, and they can have a little bit more of a practical knowledge of like, this is how we actually get there,
Right.
And this is what's going to happen. Well, like once we are there.
And I think the people, our guests too, they obviously don't come on because they need to be known. Like for instance, you guys had like Scott Johnson on there. Like he doesn't need more recognition. Like Tom Hanks,
Right.
Bill Bachman, Colin McNutt, Mike McIntosh, Tom Rick. Those people, they don't need any more recognition. They come on because they want to share stuff. They want to like give insight, which was awesome. So those stories and just hearing kind of like how human it makes drum corps.
Right.
Because I think you mentioned earlier, like when you're young and in high school, you see this and you're just like, how is this attainable? But really, it makes it more attainable because, like, man, these are just dudes like me. They just practiced a lot. They just drummed a lot.
That's the biggest thing. Like, if I was a high school kid and had the opportunity to listen to a 2-hour conversation of Tom Monks talking about a day in 90 something where he was doing this, or it's like it makes it all real. It takes them like you mentioned, George, the superhero element. When you're in high school, you look at these people marching and teaching, and you're just like, how do they do all this? And it just further, I think the wall analogy is really good. It further lets you see on the other side of the curtain, or breaks down that wall of these are just normal people. They've just put in the time, put in the effort, kind of kept an open mind and just kept pushing through it. And it can tell someone that's young, hey, you might not be good enough yet, but they weren't good when they were 15 either.
Well,
they weren't good when they were 17.
You guys brought up Jeff Queen earlier, and I marched 2 years at VK with Jeff back my first 2 seasons of drum corps. And the funny anecdote I always like to tell about him is that at auditions in 90, and this was after he had marched Bluecoats in 89, during a lunch break, he and I worked on Double Beat, the long version. So with the one where it was like da 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 da, like where it kept going, because he couldn't play it, and I had played it in high school, so he wanted to play it with me so that he could figure out, oh, how is this supposed to feel, and to think of like him, he was still in high school at the time, but like the thing of him starting from that place and eventually getting to where he got to, again, like it makes it more human, it makes it more like, okay, I can see the journey. And that it's not like certain people are just chosen to do this, right? And they start like really close to the mountaintop.
This is a funny throwback to, we had Cameron Halls on one of our episodes who ended up marching Carolina Crown and Blue Devils and Rhythm X and stuff. But we did a reaction video with him at BD. And thank God that YouTube wasn't really prevalent in my high school day, or else I'd probably have some awful videos. But he had a video on his YouTube channel of him like in high school. So the first thing we did was like react to his like video in high school and him playing. And I was like, dang, man, you made BD with this crap audition tape. But then obviously we cut scene to like him 5 years later, and you can see him in a Blue Devils uniform. Like that is awesome. And I hope more kids see stuff like that. Like, this dude who's competing for gold medals and drum trophies was this dude 5 years prior.
Yeah.
Dude, and his dad was like a drumming legend himself,
Brad.
Blue Devils legacy, yeah.
And then he taught like the Cavaliers lines when they were at the beginning of their ascent, the late 80s into the early 90s, yeah.
And I'm super excited that kids these days, it's become less of a geographical inhibitor on where you are, because the amazing internet and connection, you can get in touch with people. I think it used to be a lot like you kind of just had to be close to somebody who knew what they were doing and hope that they gave you good advice. But now you can get in touch with anybody you want to get the good advice. Yeah,
it's really interesting. You guys had mentioned a little bit earlier about making this whole thing more human. Since Robert and I are older, a lot of these people that we've talked to, that we've interviewed, are our age, right? And so we all grew up together and all of that stuff. And it's hard for us not to see that. Like, number one, we know that they're icons, quote unquote, and famous, but we also know them as people, right? And it's a weird like juxtaposition that a lot of people handle differently. Some people are very uncomfortable with like how they're perceived publicly with all the sort of fame, because they just want to be like that normal person. Other people are fueled by it. and it's a little bit of a happier marriage. But one thing I loved about our interviews so far is that that's what we want to that's what we want to show people. We want to show people that there is something underneath the sort of iconic status and all of the achievements and all of that stuff, because that is the beginning of a glimpse into how do you do that for yourself.
I think if you don't show that, it kind of sells those people a little short. Like, if you just think of this person as like a great player, he's a great player, it almost minimizes all the work they had to do to get there. Like for me, I made Crown and marched Rhythm X and stuff, but man, there were days where I spent 45 minutes to an hour just playing accent tap in a practice room because I sucked at it.
Right.
And like, that wasn't the most fun thing I ever played in my career, but it was what had to happen in order for me to get to where I wanted to go, because I sucked at playing accent tap. So I got to figure it out. And to humanize those people, I think it pays respect to like the hard work. And I think that's a lot of like what we want to do today with the podcast as well. And our reaction videos and this stuff is, yeah, we critique things and we have our opinions about things for sure, but it's always under the respect for what these kids are being asked to do and what they're doing. Because I know what they had to do to make that spot or get that spot, or the summer that they had to do to make it to finals or semifinals or prelims or whatever. So yeah, I may be like, they just didn't have it. They just weren't as good as group X or group Y, but that would be never saying that they weren't good, because I do understand what they're having to do.
Yeah. And whenever we do that reaction stuff, just to piggyback for a second and kind of clarify, I always, maybe more than I need to sometimes, I always try to make sure we iterate that or verbalize that at some point when we're like, man, that group played way better, or like, oh, they take that attack on that roll or whatever in the reaction videos. It's like, we're splitting hairs here. Like any of these groups from the first place percussion section, whether it's indoor, drum corps, all the way to 15, they're some of the best drum lines in the country. Even if you're getting 15th place, like you're really good, whether it's drum corps, whether it's indoor. And so we are splitting hairs, but again, as part of that goal of a window into the top level, like this is the kind of stuff that people that have been on the other side of the wall, this is how we assess this stuff. This is what we think when we watch these groups and how we're reacting, literally, whether it's in the lot live with no cameras on or anything, or Evan and I making reaction videos, or at the bar later with our friends or at their apartment where we're staying. We're saying all the same stuff. And so we want to show this is, and honestly, we've had people tell us it's been educational for them, because like we'll call stuff out and they're like, oh, I didn't even hear that bad last diddle. Like Evan and I get so in the weeds sometimes where it's like, oh, that fell out of the very last diddle, man. And somebody can rewind and then hear what that sounds like, and they might learn from that. And so that's been kind of cool too. It's been unintentionally educational for others that have told us that since we've been doing this.
Honestly, the hardest thing is for me to watch the high school kids, just because, first of all, they're super nasty, a lot of them. Yeah. But I'm still like judging them on like Fred Sanford quality DCI, and then I'm like, oh wait, this kid's like 13, so all right.
It's like our ears are matured and tuned to listen for the perfection that like your Blue Devils or your Crown or whatever will achieve in the summer. So we know what really good sounds like, and we do have to remind ourselves a lot. Oh, that kid, that snare line, the oldest kid's like 16.
Kid can't even drive.
This is ridiculous. He's playing this clean, and it's still amazing at that. So